Hello, everyone. This is the Eddie Network Podcast, and I'm your host, Ed Breniger. I'm glad that you're with us today. And my guest today is Wes Marner. Marner, isn't it? Marner.
Marner, yes.
I've known some Marners in my lifetime, actually.
Oh, really?
Yes, I'm down here in North Carolina. So, welcome, Wes. Glad you're here. And we were introduced by, I'm blanking who it was. It
It
was
was, I think it was Ellen Dobson.
Ellen Dobson. Yes.
Yes.
It was a
Yes.
we had a fantastic conversation about people's careers and about science and research and all of those things. And I are you in that world?
I'm in that world. I straddle a few different places. Ellen and I are colleagues here at the Morgridge Institute. We work together.
Hmm.
Um, and we're in the same group. So I'm the director of the team, and my team, we kind of wear two different hats. One is sort of the career mentorship space, professional development space for the graduate students and postdocs and scientists that work here. My group also does public engagement with science. So a big part of our job is connecting our scientists with the public that we serve. And so my group we call ourselves community engagement because that encompasses both parts. There's the inward facing, working with our community here within the Institute, and there's the outward facing, where we work with sort of the larger public and those sort of who aren't in our building every day.
So let's help me to understand how you all are defining science because
Yeah,
it's a broad and very um, well, just a big field. And so
it's a big term.
it's a
Yeah.
big term. Yeah.
So, so we define science. Let me just back up and tell you who I work for. So, I work for a place called the Morgridge Institute for Research,
Okay.
and we are a biomedical research institute. We're located on the University of Wisconsin Madison's campus, but we're not part of the university. We are an independent nonprofit. And so a lot of what we do is related to biomedical science, things that are looking at improving human health, studying some fundamental science questions about disease and how biology works. So, a lot of times when I think science, I go straight to the biological space because that's where we work. I think for the work we do with the public, I tend to think of it more as the biology is the vehicle because that's what we know how to talk about. But sometimes we work with youth or adults and they come in and they're more interested in astrophysics or engineering topics or something like that. And we go where they take us, right? We let them chase their curiosity and develop an interest, develop an identity for science. And if it clicks with them with biology, awesome. If it clicks with them somewhere else, that's fine too.
That's
I don't know if
very
that answers your question about how we define science, though.
well. You kind of focused it on biomedical, so
Yeah.
that's that explains to me what you're doing. And I mean, you're not studying astrophysics, or you're
No,
not working in that
no.
area. Okay, so
Yeah.
there's some distinctions here that are worth making.
Yeah, for sure.
I live in Winston-Salem, and they have a
Hmm.
huge medical innovation program at the Wake Forest University's Medical Center, and
Hmm.
and it's really interesting what they're doing, and they're looking at how to develop 3D printed human organs, which,
Yep.
which to me is just the most fascinating thing. And the fellow that's the head of that is, I hope to have him on the podcast soon. So because
Okay.
I want to know more about that because
Yeah. And
be
it's fascinating work. I mean, we have people that work at some of those boundaries too, and it's fascinating to see how we can take knowledge that we've been acquiring and understanding that we've been building for decades and turn it into something that eventually we hope will make it to the hospital bedside, right? And or to a therapeutic or something that will be helping people down the road. We tend to work. more, we call it, our moniker for it is fearless science, but we tend to work more at the basic science level, sort of like looking at fundamental questions, some of the early stages of that research.
Yeah.
Um, to think, you know, if you think about a lot of biomedical advances over time, few, if any of them happened overnight, right? Or on a fast time scale, right? Like if you look at some therapeutic medicines, they may be built on science that began as a, huh, how does that work kind of question from
Kind of,
20, 25
kind
years
of like
prior,
penicillin.
right?
The way penicillin was developed would be
Yeah,
an example of that.
yeah. Penicillin's a great example of that. Current drugs, right? Like if you look at like the GLP-1 medicines, right? That like the Ozempic and all that stuff that everybody's talking about now. Some of the fundamental research back on that was to look at how venom from certain kinds of reptiles worked, I believe.
Really.
Um, yeah, it was either that, I can't remember the details. It was either how a venomous lizard or something slows down the metabolism of its prey, or maybe how the lizard itself slows its metabolism during hibernation. I can't remember. I don't know the details. But it's like if somebody 20 years ago was like, why are we studying lizards? Like, what's the point? Well, now look 20 years later and we've got these medicines that everybody thinks are life changing, right? If you look at gene editing like CRISPR and things like that, that everybody talks about, some of the fundamental research for that was looking at the bacteria that make yogurt, right? So you kind of never know where these things will take you. And a lot about what we do is to say, be curious, make, educated, informed decisions about what kind of science you do, but be open-minded that maybe the science will take you somewhere you're not expecting.
It sounds like science from that perspective is really a metaphor for life.
Sure. I
And that
like that.
it doesn't get applied like that very often, does it?
No, it does not. It does not. And thinking about how I work with folks who are still in their scientific training, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I was one of them. Like, so I'm an engineer by training. I'm a chemical engineer, and I don't do chemical engineering anymore. And through most of your education, when you're coming up through higher ed and certainly like graduate school, things like that, they're like, this is the path, this is the step, this is the next development step for you. And not everybody's willing to chase what they're curious about or chase what maybe in their gut they feel they want to do. They go where the system tells them to go. So
Hmm.
yeah, I like that analogy that, sometimes chasing those fundamental questions in science, it's a little bit like defining your life, defining your career, defining where you want to go.
You'll love this, and I've said this on the podcast many times before. My grandmother, when I was 12, told me, "You may do anything you want, but do not bring shame to the family name." But what I took from that was I can go do anything I want, and I
Yeah.
really have done. I've gone in so many different directions during the course of my career, just because, oh, that sounds interesting. I'm going to go try that.
Yeah.
It's not so simple as that, but it's yeah. I've where I
It's a
started,
mindset.
not where I've ended up.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Did you feel that way from the beginning though? Like early on in your career and your education and things like that, did you have that sort of chase it where I want to go from the beginning, or did you have to come around to giving yourself permission to do that?
Um, I felt I felt permission to explore, thanks to my grandmother. Okay, but when I went off to college, and I remember sitting in it's my first semester freshman year, sitting in a history class, thinking, how am I going to read all this stuff? This just doesn't work for me. And I was probably not well suited to be a college student because I was a big picture person and I
Okay.
was a slow reader, not because I couldn't read, but I thought about everything I read, every sentence, every paragraph. And so if you have
Hmm.
a 500-page book in about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or a month, that's really difficult to do. So I was poorly suited for the traditional academic program, and it took me
Okay.
it took me 2 years to kind of get reoriented so I could not flunk out. I mean, I was close to flunking out after my second year because I just didn't fit into that program. Uh,
Hmm.
and so I've just been really curious all along, and I found myself in an American Studies program. I went to UNC Chapel Hill, and it allowed me to go in any direction I wanted to go in. So yeah, this has been true of me for over 50 years.
Okay. Nice.
I
Nice.
wouldn't recommend it to anyone unless this is the only thing you can do. And so all this, you know, well, I've studied a lot about science, and I know that one of the core practices is how things get reduced down to the smallest essence or whatever it may be.
Hmm.
Reductive study. Well,
Hmm.
I didn't know how to do that. I don't know, still don't know how to do that because I'm putting connections together, and
Yeah.
that which in that sense I could probably fit into the world of science because that's part of what you all do. You put those things.
Yeah.
So that kind of explains who I am and why I'm doing a podcast where I get to talk to all kinds of people and find it very and infinitely interesting.
Yeah. And make connections. And yeah, for sure. I think that was one of the things, for me, it's so funny how they like these parallelisms, how science works, how like being a connector of people and being a connector of topics and stuff. These things have so many parallels, right? So like I said, I'm an engineer, right? And so when I was going through graduate school, the labs that I worked in were engineering labs. They were bioengineering labs, biochemical engineering. They were engineering. And so we were about building things. And so the mindset that, I often had coming through school was in the same way, if you were thinking like a mechanical process, you get parts, you get bits, you put them together, and you assemble a machine that does whatever, right? But you can look at biology that way. You can
Yeah.
assemble parts from different organisms to make them do what you want them to do and accomplish some task. And it was very different than when I was out of graduate school in a science group to be like, I probe this thing, right? Like I probe this system. I understand this to its full depth and all the complexities of it. And it's a very different way of thinking than to say, well, what does it do? And how can I utilize, like, how can I pluck it out of this system and go put it over here or tinker
Yeah.
with it? Yeah. And in life, right, you need people that are sort of those deep divers and pull things apart down to their details. And then you need people who connect and make linkages. And, all of these things are related.
So let me ask you this, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking about the historic course of where science goes.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Um, do you see science as a mature field, or is it still in its infancy?
Neither, because I think that implies a starting and an end point. I
Okay.
think when I think of science, right? I think of science as a process more than a body of knowledge, right? And I think, I work with a lot of youth in our community engagement programs that come in to do science field trips, right? And some of people's early like concepts of science are that it's like, well, we know what there is to know about physics, about gravity or whatever, or about a cell, right? And we know the things, we've got the answer, and you can fill in the blanks and we're done, right? And they're like, no, that's not really how it works. It's science to me is more the process of chasing a question, chasing a curiosity, droving into it, and then letting that guide you to the next thing and guide to the next thing, guide to the next thing, right? So if you want to talk about maturity of science, I think there's fields that are more mature than others because they've been through the process longer, right?
Mhm.
Like we know we know a lot more about uh I don't know, certain we know more about like planetary systems from the solar system, right, than we perhaps know about a unified theory of physics because we haven't figured that out yet. Or I'm making this up. I should
Yeah,
probably come up with examples in my own field. But I think science is more of a process. So rather than to say, is science mature? I think we can say, maybe in the field of cellular biology, we know a lot more than we did, but there's still a long way to go.
okay, let me rephrase my question
Okay.
because that part of my life I've spent as a consultant, and so I'm walking into places where there are processes, you know,
Yeah.
and the question that I have is, um, are the processes of science um, liberating or constrictive? Meaning that that we've already decided this is how we're going to do this, and we want you to fit
Yeah.
into how we do this. So the
Yeah.
process is established, and so that's the lane where we want you to stay in, or it's wide open and we can go do anything we want and try to figure out things that, as you were describing earlier, the lizard or the yogurt or
Yeah.
is the discovery, the moment of discovery. Oh, well, we didn't expect this.
Yeah. When you put it that way, when you put the question that way, I would say that the structure we've put around um, how we select the kinds of science we incentivize
Hmm.
nowadays, I think is kind of restrictive, right? So if you look at the way science is funded, right? And we could have a whole conversation about the way what science was funded even 12 months ago versus today,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And
Oh
everything
yeah,
going on politically, right? We could
yeah.
absolutely talk about that. But there are um, the way I think the system is set up to to encourage people to pursue science that is a nearly sure bet, right? I think we've been set up to say, if we're going to fund this work, if I, as a funder, am I going to fund your research, the level of certainty I need from you that what you're proposing is going to pan out, I think is really high compared to what it used to be decades ago,
Yeah.
right? And so I do think there are fewer and fewer opportunities for people to say, I've got a really good reason to go follow my curiosity in this direction, but I don't know if it's going to turn into anything. And I think there's fewer ways for people to say, you're making a reasoned argument for going that way. We're willing to fund you even despite the uncertainty, right? Whereas now we want to see a positive result. We want to see that you're going to confirm something. We want to see something that's translatable into business. Those kinds of things. So in that regard, I do think we put strictures on people. And I think also with how we work with people in training in science, with graduate students and postdocs, I think they have a lot more constraints on them to produce something that works or like to have that positive outcome in order for them to continue in their career progression too.
And
It's like one of the cliches in grad school is always you wish there was a journal of things that didn't work. And
oh, I
we
love
don't
that.
we
I love that.
yeah, like, oh my gosh, coming up in grad school, the number of papers I could write in the journal of stuff that didn't work would be enormous, right? But nobody does that. Nobody publishes those things. Nobody says, we tried this and didn't pan out. And I think we've gotten to a space where there is relatively small funding compared to our resources and what we could do that we only chase sure bets.
To what
And I think
extent?
that's a detriment to science.
To what extent is this being driven by the need to monetize the outcomes?
I think a lot. I think it's a mix of my read on it is it's a mix of wanting to monetize things um, and um, just the fact that there is the ratio of available funding to
Hmm.
quality science that could be done, that ratio is shrinking. And so it's putting pressure on, you've got to have a slam dunk before you ever write the grant.
See, my appreciation, the period of time I love about science was the first half of the 20th century. And Marie Curie was my hero. And here she and her husband, immigrate from Poland to Paris, and she gets cut. She's excluded from all the research labs, and they go find a garage, and they set up their lab in the garage, and they see that to me is the beauty of the scientific endeavor. It's the discovery aspect of it. It's not the and those things just really inspire me, because I
Yeah.
I think I think when you're
It's the
you
curiosity piece.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. I just think about this in terms of kids, and how is it that they come to have an appreciation of science or appreciation of math,
Yeah.
appreciation of any field, and it's because something transcendent and magical happened to them at some point, and they read something or they saw something, or someone said something. They were drawing something, and someone made a comment, and and it touched them, and that's where they go off and they become great
It goes.
or whatever they are.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, and the way we do informal science, so we call it informal science education, meaning just we're not in a classroom, right? Um, and the way we think about it is sparking that interest in youth, right? Like, so the reason I've got that book on the wall, you commented on, like, what's my collection back here, right? The reason I have that solar system, I can't do this. I'm not a weatherman. I can't do the green screen thing. The reason I've got the solar system book on my wall, right, is my parents gave me that book when I was like 7 years old or so.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just about like the NASA probes that were exploring the solar system and we lived in a super rural area of West Virginia, not a high resource area, anything like that. And that book, combined with science shows on TV and Star Trek and things like that, like hooked me on science, right? And in the same way you meet some kids that are obsessed with dinosaurs, like I was obsessed with planets, like that was my jam, right? And it set it off. Now my interests migrated in things, but that was the trigger. And so when we think about kids now and the programming that we do, that's the first thing we try to do is spark interest,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like striking a flint, right? And you hope it catches fire. And we want to be part of a ecosystem where kids, that little fire gets fed again and again and again and again until it becomes self-sustaining. And then at that point, we're going from sparking their interest, lighting that curiosity, to how can we make this relevant for them and make that a part of their identity? So then they want to become scientists, not just like, oh, science is cool, but like, I want to be a scientist,
Yeah.
right? Kind of, the analogy I give for myself is I like to play the piano. I am not a pianist, right? Like I'm not like a professional. I didn't go that route, but I'm interested in it. So what's the difference between getting somebody interested and then switching that into identity? Those are that's the space we like to work
Yeah. I like that. I like that very much. And when my oldest son, who's about to turn 40, was 12, this is back in the mid 90s. He was, and we had one computer in the house, and he asked for his own computer, which was a big deal. We were actually living in West
in. Yeah.
Virginia. Happened.
Oh,
We were.
so you met a martyr and you lived in West Virginia. I need to figure out where you've been. But go on. I'm sorry.
We'll come to that. And so we found him a used computer, and he started writing. And he was spending 2 to 3 hours a day at the computer, teaching himself how to write novels.
Okay.
And he wanted to learn how to write war novels. You know, he wanted to learn how to write battle scenes, and he wanted to
Mhm.
learn how to write dialogue, and he taught himself to do that. And so now he's a he works. He has a regular job, but he's also a writer, and he's published one book, and he's got two more that'll come out fairly soon. And
Nice.
but that's where it all started, you know.
Yep.
And yeah, it's an interesting thing to watch how people capture something and they carry it, and this is what Ellen and I talked about. So they get to a certain point, and there's some at that point there is sort of a point of, okay, I've done this. I'm going to move into something else. And it's like she was doing research and then she decided to move into something else. And now she's doing the work she does with the institute there. And I see that that's a product of being taught how to continue to learn.
Yeah.
Because if you can continue to learn, you can continue to reinvent yourself.
Yep. Totally.
And
Totally.
so yeah, it's a very interesting thing. So where in West Virginia did you grow up?
So my family moved around a lot when I was a kid. When we lived in West Virginia, I lived in Lewisburg.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah,
so we lived there for a time, bopped around the Midwest a little bit, and then my family, my mom and my siblings, we ended up back in Virginia, is where I call home now, is what I would call home. Is in kind of nearby, like Stanton,
yeah.
Augusta County, Charlottesville, kind of that area. Where were you in West Virginia?
We spent 7 years in Elkins, and I
Okay.
worked at the college there, Davidson Elkins College. I worked there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was a great 7 years. I loved West Virginia.
Yeah.
It's a
It's
great,
beautiful.
yeah. Um, Difficult place for high school kids to be exposed to a lot of stuff, but
Yep.
that's okay. You know, there's a lot of other advantages to living there. And
Yep.
Lewisburg is a
Everywhere's
lovely
got its
place.
pros and cons.
Lewisburg is a
Yeah.
lovely.
Lewisburg. Yeah. It's nice. It's a lot different now than it was when I was 6, but
Right. Yeah.
but it's a beautiful part of the world.
So, the people that you're working with there at the Institute, what
Hmm.
what what does their um, career trajectory look like? What's the kind of the typical thing that happens with the
Yeah.
people you work with there?
It's pretty varied actually. So the two main groups that we work with are people, graduate students who are earning their PhDs, or postdocs who just finished their PhDs and they're getting some additional experience of some sort for their next step. And I would say it's probably split. About half of the folks have an interest in going the academic route. Like they want to be a faculty member, they want to be an investigator somewhere, and run their own research lab. I'd say probably about half, maybe up to 2/3 of folks want to do that. Um, a lot of the upheaval that we've seen in the federal government is causing a lot of consternation for people about whether that's going to be possible. And then I would say the others are generally interested in private sector work, and that could look like what we like an industrial, like going to work for like a biopharmaceutical place or a biotech startup or something like that. And then we have a handful of folks that are interested in doing more science policy, science nonprofit, science communication kind of work. So I'd say outside of the folks that want to go a very traditional faculty route, then we have kind of a whole spread of different interests in terms of people, what they want to do, how they want to use the skills they're getting, and apply them when they're done with their work.
Are there fields of science which have a lot more opportunities in the future than maybe people would recognize? Like I don't know if that's a very well crafted question. Where do you see the greater um, maybe funding of science in the future? Maybe that's a better way of.
Uh, oh man, I couldn't tell you what funding's going to look like in 3 months. When the, so I think certainly artificial intelligence is going to be big, right? Like there's so much effort going into that, and so much investment going there. That's going to be a big area. Depending on how you define AI, we've been doing AI for a long time, right?
Right.
Including in biology. But certainly there's a lot of interest in how do we leverage a lot of these computing tools to solve or to put toward biological questions for sure. Um, I think there's so that's a big one. You're asking kind of like where I think some of the bigger opportunities would be. I do think that's a really big one. Um, I think there's also I'd say just sort of just a technologies space, right? Like there's certainly we're always going to need improved diagnostics, improved imaging, and
Yeah.
like those kinds of things. I'd say that that's also a big space that will continue to grow. So, and I'd say where I interface, those are probably two of the biggest ones. Um, there's always an enormous amount of work to do in a lot of fields. The question is, where's the funding going to be for it? And then, people need to eat, right? So they need jobs. And so they go where the funding is. So I would say those are probably two of the big opportunity spaces.
Well, I'm, my my assumption is that if there's a purpose to it, it'll get funded. Somebody will come forward and say, "Hey, this is we're putting some money into it." And if it's more private sector stuff than it used to be, then that's okay too. Wherever it
Yeah.
comes from, it's it has every source of funding has its own aspects of positivity and negativity, and so you just
Yeah.
I've seen that in just as a consultant,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
as you just deal with the nature of organizations and institutions, and
Yeah.
nothing. There's no such thing as pure science in I guess, in that regard.
Yeah. I would agree with you on that. I think I'd push back a little bit to say that there's funding that is more and less has outcomes that are more and less applied, if you
Uh-huh.
will.
Okay.
And the ones that are potentially less applied from the get-go may become quite relevant later on. But you got to put in that upfront work, right? So, and if you look at the private sector, that if we lean on the private sector to do a lot of the funding, by its nature, they're closer to wanting a good ROI on their investment, right? And so they're going to want to see stuff that's closer to applied ranges. And I think for the uncertainty, I keep beating around the bush around, what's going on with the federal government and funding there. Um, I think I think we run the risk of shortchanging future returns by not investing in things that we don't know the outcome yet, right?
Hmm.
Look at the COVID vaccine, right? We put all of that basic science funding into mRNA work, not knowing where it would go, but it got us to a point where, because of that early NIH funding, that open-ended, like, let's chase the fundamentals, we were able to produce a COVID vaccine lightning fast. And now we have this mRNA vaccine technology that is, amazing. So that's where I get worried when we start talking about, like, well, what do we fund and will the private sector step in? Maybe, but there's got to be when you start talking about private sector investment, there becomes this economic driver of it. Whereas I think there's an element of working for the social good by having society and our government and our society fund some of these things that can push us forward later on.
Yeah, I get that, and I think what is really sitting in the back of my mind is how do we help the scientists,
Yeah,
not the science administrators or the science
yeah,
funders, but the scientists have a voice in all of this.
Yeah.
because I think that, I mean, I look at education and there's a lot of, the growth in education has been at the administrative level, you know, and so where, is the voice of the teacher. We're going through a situation here in my town where the the school system is, on the has come out and said we have a $50 million shortfall in funding for the schools, and they've had to let over 300 people go as they were starting the school year. I mean that, and so
Mhm.
where's the voice of the
That's
teacher
rough.
in that? So that's where
Yeah.
I I would like to see more scientists like you talking to us. And I know that there's all these kind of restrictions from it. And that's all I'm saying is because,
Yeah.
and I'm not really saying speak politically. I'm just saying speak about the beauty and the
Well,
magic
what we do.
and the benefits of science.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
for sure.
tell your story.
Yeah, and there's definitely a need and a place for that. I will say I mean, so this is the space I'm in, right? Is doing public engagement
Right,
with
right.
science. And there's one of the things that has come out of the current chaos in Washington is a number of scientists are like, how can we connect with the public? Like, how do we go about this? What do we do? And I'm like, well, let's talk. Let's talk about how to do that. I do think there's a um, like another big vein of what we do, right? Is like I could have you in for a program, talk about what we do, talk about our work, and you and I could spend an hour talking about the virology research that happens here at the Institute or the imaging research that happens here at the Institute. Another really important part of that is also, hey, Ed, meet Joe, who's one of our scientists here, or meet Anne, who's one of our scientists, and humanizing the people that do the science, right?
Yeah.
Because then you start realizing, like, well, what's this person's day to day like? What are they pursuing? Oh, they're curious, they're just like me, like, and you build some of that connection, and then that's how you start dialogue on, like, well, what is science? How do you do it? What's important to you? Why do you do this work? And I think there's a bit of that that's missing from our dialogue to say, um, as opposed to like a lot of our conversations, which go to like, well, just what's the financial bottom line of why we do this, right? What's in it? What's the ROI on what we do? Well, yeah, that's an important part of the conversation for some of what science does, but
Yeah.
there's an equally important part of saying we do this because we think it's important to chase these questions, and here's why, and this is why I'm passionate about it. Those kinds of conversations I think are really important. Equally important, sorry, one other bit of that
Yeah.
is I think it's equally important for the scientists who do this work
Uh-huh.
to listen to the public that they're talking to, right? Like it's about a bidirectional dialogue and not scientists in like a white lab coat and nerdy glasses telling you how things work. Like it's about listening to the people that we serve too and building a dialogue.
You have just given a really fantastic rationale for why I do my podcast.
Awesome.
Because I don't have access to people that I want to know. And so the whole mechanism of this podcast has been built on networking through introductions. So Ellen introduced you to me and
Yeah.
me to you, and we're having this amazing conversation. I'm just, enjoying this so much. And there's so many more people that I want to talk to. And if you go cold call on them, they're just gonna ghost you. They're not gonna talk to you. Who are you?
Hmm.
You're nobody.
Right.
But if someone with credibility says, "Well, I think you ought to talk to Ed," that matters. And so what it has given me is the opportunity to bring people on like you and say, "Tell me about who you are and what you're doing, and let me
Hmm.
appreciate what you're doing, not challenge you,
Hmm.
not be negative, not being critical, but just to appreciate what you're doing and let you celebrate the work that you're doing." And I get to do that
Hmm.
twice a week, and I've been doing it for 2.5 years. And it
That
has
sounds
the
amazing.
impact of building an environment of appreciation that follows me around because people want to be appreciated. They want someone to say, "Hey, that's really cool. That's really great." And I think that's what
Yeah.
we're trying to do there at the Institute is to engage with the public so you can say, "Hey, look at these people that we have working here. These are really cool people." Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, they may be nerds, but they're really cool nerds. I mean, it's
We're proud of being nerds. That's okay.
yeah,
But and it's equally important too for our scientists, right? I don't want to lose that point that it's equally important that our scientists are making a connection with those who maybe wouldn't identify as a scientist
right.
or who aren't here at the institute to connect with them and learn like what why are you interested in why are we interested in talking to one another? What do we care about? What do you think when you think of science, right? Because in the same way that you could imagine there's plenty of um, assumptions that a member of the public might make about scientists or someone who works at a university or something like that, you know, assumptions and biases go both ways, right? So
Yes,
just getting people to talk to one another breaks all of that down.
yes.
And then you can have a real conversation about what should we be funding? What should we be doing? Where do we find common ground about what we jointly believe we should do as a society and not all the yelling and screaming and the money's the only bottom line, like all of that kind of stuff that goes on nowadays.
Okay, here's my last question for you. And
Okay.
so there are going to be people listening, watching this, who are parents of children.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you say to a parent whose child has shown, say, an interest in animals or an interested in the solar system or interested in something which has a connection to science? What do you say
Yeah.
to the parent as to how do I help them discover what they need to know as a child in that regard?
Oh, that is such a good question. I think what I would say is to any parent, and I'd like to hope that I do this as a parent myself, is to provide as big a buffet of possible as possible to the kid to let them latch on to what they're interested in and to chase it some. And to be okay with them deciding down the road, I've been eating salad for a while, maybe now I want some, pasta or whatever, like to be able to change their dish from time to time. I think that's the biggest thing. At a practical level, if we were talking somebody interested in science, um, and they wanted to really go hunting for things, I would say no matter where you are in this country, there is no place like a library. There is no place in the world like a library in terms of what it offers to kids, in terms of programming, books, knowledge, all that kind of thing. And if you've got resources through uh, your schools, your higher education that's nearby, if there's, depending on where you're at, there is always a wealth of people who like sharing what they do. It may not always be easy to find them, but they're there for sure. That would be kind of my first line answer for you.
I think that's a great answer, and I would add one piece to that.
Yeah.
Um, Find your own interest in that you share with your child. So
Yeah.
that you may be discovering science as a 35-year-old or a 45-year-old adult for the first time, and you're having um, this moment of sharing that with your child so that together you're
Yeah.
learning. That's the that's the magic, and that's what I found with my children. When we did that, I did that with my children, so that now they're my best friends because
Yeah.
we share a
That's awesome.
similar collection of things that we're interested in, and so that would be the only thing I would add to that.
That's a awesome addition. I think that's fantastic. That's great. So okay, so now I have a question for you. So you have one
Yeah.
who got the computer in the 90s and he's the writer.
Right.
What other interests did your kids chase?
Um, my other son went off to college and he studied audio engineering, audio technology engineering or something like that. His first
Hmm.
year, because his goal was to design guitar amps.
Okay. All right.
And after a year, he says, I don't need college to design an guitar amp. I mean, it's pretty simple. So he switched to physics,
Okay.
and he's ended up in as a psychotherapist. There's you know
Okay. I was not expecting to hear that. That's
goes through
quite
all these
that's quite a
iterations.
progression.
And at one point he was going to be a minister, and they said, no, that's not what I want to do. And then he got into counseling, and oh yeah, now he's a psychotherapist, and it could well be that he ends up as a working on a PhD someday and becoming a teacher. And
Right on.
and then my daughter, it just cares for people, and she worked with middle schoolers at a church and for a while, and she's got a son that she's taking care of, and she's doing some other kind of social work type of things. And my other son, the oldest one who's the writer, he works for Amazon in their distribution center, and so he's a logistics guy, and
Okay.
I was also writing, and
Systems thinker. I love it.
he's a systems thinker,
Nice.
and he's really
Nice.
good at
I
that.
love it. That's
So
cool.
yeah, and it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see where they end up because they're all in their 30s, and so you know
Okay.
you get what I found in my career is that people when the people enter into their 40s is when they make decisions about their future.
Hmm.
They say, well, I've been doing this for 20 years or 25 years, and I'm not sure I want to do this anymore. So what am I going
Mm.
to do?
Yeah. And they decide if they want to switch it up or not. Yeah.
So they're going through a career change. I mean, this is what Ellen and I talked about, and and what I found is that for many people, it's a very difficult shift to take because they've kind of absorbed the ethos and the value system of the institution where they've been working. And all of a sudden, if they're not going to be there anymore, they got to say, well, who am I and what can I do? And and
Yeah.
this is the beautiful moment. I mean, we live in a modern age where it is possible to reinvent yourself at age 45.
Yes. Yep. That's
And
true. And you have the opportunity. Many of us are lucky enough to have the resources to be able to make that pivot or the luxury to be able to take that time and think about it if we want to. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No,
So,
that's definitely true.
and
That's
with
cool.
longevity, I mean, that's a whole nother topic for us. Longevity meaning that people are going to live into their 80s or 90s or past 100, then they really could have a third career. They could have a third life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's where I am, and I'm in the third half of my life.
Yeah. And you
So,
get to think about what's your next act going to be? What do you want to do? Yeah.
and I think,
I know for me it's been gratifying to see like with kids, right? Like so my husband and I we have a 12-year-old and she is a musician through and through and me and my husband neither one are. Like I'm an engineer, he's a computer guy. And so it's been interesting for us to think about like where's she going? How do we support that? What do we do? And then we hit that late 30s, early 40s like what's important, right? How do we want to balance career versus balancing her? And then, I've got relatives that they're approaching retirement age, and they're like, "What's my next act going to be?" Right? What do we go next? So, yeah,
and you can either approach it with great fear and trepidation, or you can approach it with ex- energy and excitement and a desire for discovery. And
yeah,
you have that choice.
right,
And when people ask me about that, I said the only thing I would caution you on is just be careful with your money. Don't waste your
right,
money. Make sure
yep,
that you have the ability to make the changes in the way you want to make the changes because you have not squandered whatever wealth you have.
Yeah, it's a pretty finite resource a
Yes,
lot of times.
it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's been really great to have you on, and
Yeah. Thank you.
uh, I love talking about this stuff, obviously, but I wish you well at the institute. I hope that you all are hugely successful because the long-term impact of what you all are doing will be, great advances in science, but also advances in society because the science will have a really a wonderful effect upon the way people live and in their longevity and their in the betterment of their lives. And so all of those things I see is packed into kind of the world that you live in.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's amazing work. I tell people, and this is not an exaggeration. I kind of pinch myself that I still get to work here every day with these people doing this work, and so many of them that are at the very nascent stages of their career, and they're going to go out and amplify what we do here by doing more great work where they go. So,
It's exciting.
yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and chat with you and the people, your listeners and your viewers. And yeah,
Well,
always happy to make connections with
I
anybody.
invite you to introduce me to people that you think I should be talking to.
I'll do that.
And so because I'd like to continue this conversation.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you, Wes.
Cool.
And thank
Thanks,
you
Ed.
everyone for
Great chatting with
watching.
you today.
Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye bye.